Hello and welcome to Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from Oblate School of Theology's Department of Continuing Education. I'm your host, Antonio Fritzi, and each episode we bring you meaningful conversations with spiritual leaders, authors, and speakers shaping our understanding of spirituality, the life of faith, and community. Today we turn our attention to a towering figure whose work has deeply influenced Christian spirituality, pastoral care, and personal formation, Henri Nouwen. Now, if you're not familiar with Nouwen, that's more than all right. We'll be talking about who he was and why his works are such an enduring influence on so many. This August, Oblate School of Theology will host a unique event, exploring the contribution and legacy of Henri Nouwen an Academic Symposium. Renowned scholars and spiritual leaders from across the country will gather together here in San Antonio, Texas, to reflect on Nouwen and his impact on theology, spirituality, and pastoral care. Joining me today is Dr. David Pocta. He's the director for the Institute of the Study of Contemporary Spirituality here at Oblate School of Theology. He has his own podcast, Thread, and is the author of Cries from the Wilderness, a volume exploring the future of Christian spirituality. Let's dive in. David, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. It's not often that we get somebody who has their own podcast on here, so we're excited to have you join us.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we'll start with the basics. Henri Nouwen. He's a widely known figure, a very impactful figure, especially in Christian spirituality, but not everybody in our audience may be aware of who he is. So again, beginning at the beginning, could you speak a little bit about who Henri Nouwen was and the impact of his work on Christian spirituality?
Beginning at the beginning. Well, I don't know if I'm prepared to talk about his beginning, but I can at least talk about who he was and his impact. Yes, so Henri Nouwen has a broad appeal to Catholics and Protestants. He's one of the few figures who does. He was a Dutch Catholic priest, and he was a psychologist, and he was a professor. He was a prolific spiritual writer, and he left a really significant impact when he passed away in the late 20th century. So, taught at Notre Dame, taught at Yale, taught at Harvard Divinity School. But one of the most profound things about him was he finished his life and career working for Community at Large, which was a place where adults that struggled with different disabilities lived, and he decided that he wanted to spend his final days and years there. So that's the basics of him. Now, his contributions are deep and wide. He was one of the contemporary voices that really integrated psychology and spirituality, and not only to kind of blend these fields, but to look at the importance of the human person through the lens of spirituality, and he brought a really interesting perspective on that. He was one of the few current voices that we read that really emphasize vulnerability and brokenness, the inner life. I think maybe one of the most profound things about him was he brought himself to his writings. And so you felt like you were journeying with him as he was journeying in his own brokenness and pursuing Christ. So really profound impact that Nouwen has had.
Absolutely. And, as the director of the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Spirituality here at Oblate, you work closely with Father Ron Rollheiser. And I know that Henri Nouwen is one of those figures that really continues to inspire Ron in his work. And precisely for those reasons that you pointed out, that Nouwen would talk about loneliness. He would talk about brokenness, vulnerability. And this is what made him so meaningful, again, to both Catholics, Protestants. I mean, even folks who might not immediately identify as Christian, but understand that kind of human frailty that we're dealing with in a spiritual context. Can you share with me how that kind of emphasis on that human frailty has really influenced you and your work in addressing contemporary spirituality?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think Nouwen represented the human and the academic in a way that's so integrated that He's inspired a lot of us that are in the academic world and who are confessional Christians to figure out how do we similarly do that. We talk a lot about writing spirituality versus writing about spirituality. Scholars can easily step back into that observing mode and write about things. But to actually write spirituality requires an inner integration, coming from your own journey, being vulnerable and humble, having that and this was Nouwen, right? So he had this academic depth and understanding, but he wrote in this really accessible way. And he had a reputation that he would write when he would write a book. He would write and then he'd go back and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite because he really wanted to make it as accessible as possible. And that's part of what's so profound about his writing is you would have these deep wells of truth and understanding and spirituality, but they were written in a way that we can all understand it. So that even modeling that's had a really big impact on a lot of us that are attempting to write spirituality and pursue this kind of model that he did so well at modeling. I think the other thing that was so profound about him is that he taught and modeled a ministry of presence. The reason he had such an impact in the classroom was who he was. It was the connection he had to the students. And again, I think his work with Larch to go and to be in that space and live that life and write from that space, this pastoral presence comes through in his writing. So when you ask, for me, that's one of the profound things that I look at in his life and go, wow, that's worthy of imitation. I really aspire to have that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's this kind of singular figure, or at least one that folks hope to emulate, again, who is deeply academic in his seriousness and understanding, but crucially accessible to a lot of folks. And I think that characteristic is reflected in the event that we are kind of coming together to talk about. And I'd love to move our conversation towards that because I think it's an exciting opportunity. And that is this academic symposium exploring the contribution and legacy of Henri Nouwen. And I know that ISCS here at Oblate is partnering with the Henri Nouwen Society to put on this event and I want to be sure that I'm getting these details right. It's going to be a 3-day academic gathering on Thursday, August 21st, continuing through Friday, August 22nd, and wrapping up on Saturday morning, August 23rd. Can you tell me a little bit more about what participants might hope to experience and take away from that event?
Yeah, this is a really special thing happening. The Nouwen Society exists to continue to promote the work of Nouwen, and they have a really great team that we've been meeting with now for over a year in planning this. So we're doing this in joint effort, but part of what facilitated this is that the Nouwen Society said, we want to start an endowed lecture. So every year we want there to be a scholar who works in the world of Henri Nouwen that we can have a lecture and advance this work. And they wanted the first one to be Ron Rolheiser, which is one of our, of course, near and dear scholars in San Antonio. So what we discussed was instead of just having a lecture, what if we build this whole event around Nouwen and his work, and we bring people together, not just locally for one night, but let's come together for a few days. And then let's bring in some of the voices, the people that have really spoken about Nouwen's work. And so we really went out to find who are the people that have done some significant work on understanding Nouwen and his impact and his legacy. And so we have Deirdre Lanoux, who wrote actually a book called The Spiritual Legacy of Henri Nouwen. And what she really addresses is how is it that Nouwen speaks across this spectrum? I mean, not just to Catholics as a Catholic priest, but why has he reached so many people? And so she did a lot of work on that, wrote that book. We have Robert Wicks coming, similarly, very academically significant in his own right, has written a number of books, but he wrote a book called Let's Look Together. And what's really neat about this is he actually modeled how Nouwen worked in his book. So he said, okay, I'm going to take Henri Nouwen's work, I'm going to integrate it in my life and share with you, the reader, how I'm doing that and bring the reader along. That's why he calls it Let's Look Together. And then the other keynote we have, which is kind of exciting, is we have a woman named Dr. Sarah Barton, and she holds a dual faculty appointment at Duke Divinity School and Duke's University School of Medicine. She works in both this kind of occupational therapy and theological ethics space. And what she does with Nouwen's work is she looks through those lenses at Nouwen and looks at disability theology and disability spirituality, which is really important work that's happening right now. Is how do we understand the spiritual life in light of some of the challenges that we have physically, mentally, intellectually? And so she's going to actually be delivering a paper called Who is This Stranger, and modeling it after this idea of what Nouwen did at Larch. So that's all exciting. The other last piece I'd share about this that's kind of neat, we opened this up and we let scholars or just fans of Nouwen from around the world that wanted to present something on their own work come. And we're going to do some breakout sessions and have a number of people come and speak from all kinds of different spaces and places, scholars, pastors, just Christians that are aspiring or are Nouwen fans. So it should be a really, really great event.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that was coming up for me in your description of it is not only are you bringing in these very scholarly and well-respected sources, but the ethos of the event and the subjects that they're addressing are expressive of what makes Nouwen so special, right? You talked about this kind of presence that's very clear in his spirituality, this emphasis on the embodied experience, right? Exploring our human vulnerability. And then, of course, today addressing what does that mean for folks who have different experiences of their human bodies, right? And the limitations that come along with that. So I think that, I, for one, can say the lineup is incredible in its own right and deeply connected to its subject matter, which is always something that one can appreciate from conferences of this nature. I would like to ask the question, we're going to have a lot of heavy hitting academics at this, and it is an academic symposium. I'm sure that there are probably folks watching and thinking and saying, look, I'd love to come to a deeper understanding of Henri Nouwen, and I'd be curious how his writings could influence and shape my spirituality. But that framing of academic might be something that is a little, intimidating or perhaps put me off. Is there something that you might say to allay that concern or really invite folks to be a little more confident in their willingness to attend such an academic event?
Yeah, that's a great point. And there are academic conferences that we do, and I'd go, yeah, this is probably just for people that really like to live in that space. Um, but this is the beauty of Nouwen. Nouwen really blended the academic, the personal, the vulnerable, the humble. And the people who do work with him and or aspire to, pursue an academic understanding of him, are similar kinds of people. I think people are going to find this to be very accessible, just by the nature of who Nouwen was, what he did, and the people that we have coming. I think it's going to be very personal and insightful, and it might be deep. We're okay with deep, but accessible with deep is important. And I think this is going to be an interesting blend. I think that'll be one of those special moments that will be a blend of the best of those two worlds.
So, one of the things that makes you not only an incredible person to direct the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Spirituality, but also to be involved in this academic symposium on Henri Nouwen is your academic work in the area of contemporary spirituality.
Mm.
So, given that we're kind of operating under this understanding that Nouwen speaks so powerfully to the present moment. Could you give me your impression based on your work as to what the issues in contemporary spirituality really are right now, that Nouwen speaks to?
Wow, that's a big and deep question. I think where I found myself in my own journey after being in full-time ministry work for almost 3 decades was in this kind of difficult space, this dark middle ground that I've come to call wilderness. I think a lot of people call wilderness. So Nouwen addressed the vulnerable, the dark times, the places which I now have come to believe God does God's best work. And I think that's why he resonates with so many people. I think the idea of the church being a place to help us have moral standards and ethics and to have all the right answers and the theological frameworks and all that, it has its place. But I think a lot of people are starting to ask more about that inner experience, that journey, those difficult, moments, years, periods of our life. And that's why now, and I think at such a time as this, really resonates with people because of that, because of his own identity with that and his own ability to share that.
Right. And I think, one of the things that, again, makes you an excellent voice to speak to the status of contemporary spirituality is that, as I understand it, that's one of the main areas of concern for your recent publication, Cries from the Wilderness, right? I think a lot of our listeners, having heard this conversation, one, will be excited about the symposium, but secondly, would like to get that deeper understanding that work offers. So could you speak to where they might go about finding a copy of that book?
Yes, sure. And maybe a thing or two about it. I just found in my own trying to find answers that there were people that were writing about their journeys out there. And that's really what I decided to do, was to look at who are the people writing about their own journey through these own dark spaces. How did they navigate that? What can we learn from their journeys? How do we then kind of create a theology of wilderness? How do we understand wilderness from a biblical sense? And how do we understand our spirituality in the wilderness? How are we to live once we know, okay, great, I'm in the wilderness. What does that mean? How do I now, spiritually respond to that? So that's really what the book is about. It's taking a look at how we can answer those questions. And in particular, how does that help us understand our relationship with our faith community? Because that's often what breaks down when we're in the wilderness. So all that to say, it's on Amazon. It's available in physical print form. It's also digitally available for those that want to. So people can find it on Amazon, or they can go to Bloomsbury. That's the publishing house. Bloomsbury Publications is who hosts it or published it.
Excellent. Yeah, wonderful. Awesome. And then, what I would advise is picking up a copy, catching you at the symposium, and seeing if they might get a signature,
Okay. All right. We'll be looking out.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. You've been a very gracious guest and very helpful in getting us to understand a bit more about how uniquely appropriate Henri Nouwen is to this moment, what a wonderful opportunity the academic symposium is, and how important continuing to engage with this material is for our spiritual lives today. So thank you.
Thank you, Antonio.
To our listeners, we invite you to be part of this incredible opportunity exploring the contribution and legacy of Henri Nouwen, an academic symposium, happening August 21st through the 23rd, 2025, here at Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas. This is both an in-person and online event. In-person registration is $150, including a Friday dinner, while online registration is $125. You can visit ost.edu to register today. Whether you're just dipping your toes into Henri Nouwen's work for the first time or are already well acquainted with his contribution, this is an incredible opportunity to more deeply explore his vision for a compassionate spiritual life. Thank you again for listening to Leaving Nothing Undared. Until next time, be bold in your life of faith and leave nothing undared for the gospel. God bless you.